Are you ready for the word?
Yes, sir.
Turn to Titus chapter 3. Titus chapter 3, look in verse 9. But avoid. So let's little audience participation this morning. Everybody say avoid.
Avoid.
There you go. Avoid foolish questions and genealogies and contentions and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and vain. We all have family and friends still under the deception of the Babylonian religious system of the mainstream denominations. We all still encounter and engage with people who are still under the deception of the Babylonian religions. And so we talk to them and we tell them things like they need to know the name of their Creator. We tell them that His name was written in the Masoretic text 6,823 times, that He wants us to know it, to use it, to call upon it, to extol it, to praise it. They've never heard that before. It's all new to them, and they've never considered it before. And few of them will be intrigued enough to ask more questions or to investigate it. But a few of them will. And they begin to exit their Babylon, and they begin to trickle into our assemblies, only to find out when they get here, we're ripping each other to shreds, arguing over how to pronounce the Creator's name. Brethren, these things ought not be. We talk to them and we tell them that their celebrations of Christmas and Easter and Halloween and Valentine's Day are rooted in and came forth from pagan rituals and connected to the worship of false deities. And we tell them that Yahweh has 7 holy moedims, appointments that reveal the Messiah to us, and that when we embrace those moedims, we see the beauty and the magnificence of our Messiah. And few of them will be intrigued enough to ask more questions or to even investigate it, but a few of them will. And they begin to exit their Babylon and begin to trickle into our assemblies, only to find out when they get here that we're ripping each other to shreds, arguing over which calendar to use, what date we're supposed to keep these feasts on, and what's the proper way to keep them. Brethren, these things ought not be. We have friends, family, and acquaintances still in Babylon, and so we tell them that the 4th commandment to keep the Sabbath is a perpetual commandment, and that there's no biblical support for changing it to the first day of the week. No biblical support at all. We tell them that Sunday as a worship rest day was the work of Constantine and the Roman Catholic popes. We tell them that the sign of those who worship the true Elohim is the keeping of the Sabbath. And few of them are intrigued enough to even investigate or ask more questions, but a few will. And they begin to exit their Babylon and they trickle into our assemblies, only to find out when they get here we're ripping each other to shreds and arguing over whether the Sabbath is connected to a continual 7-day cycle or connected to lunar cycles. Brethren, these things ought not be. I told you last Sabbath that today I would present to you the beliefs and teachings of lunar Sabbath keepers. And I fully intended to do that. I'm not going to just pick 1 or 2 things from their doctrine and take shots at it. I am, to the best of my ability, going to present to you what they believe and why they believe it. And the reason for that, we stated last Sabbath, the reason that I'm willing to present that to you is, from our study of James's epistle, we need to test our faith. Test what we believe and make sure that what we believe is trustworthy. But today I will not present to you their beliefs and their teachings, and the reason for that is not because I'm not prepared to do so. The reason is because as I prepared for today, I simply sensed that I was supposed to pause. I don't know for certainty the reason for the pause, but I have been doing this long enough to know that when you sense something on the inside, you better pay attention to it. Perhaps it's because I'm going to be gone next week. So perhaps it's not wise for me to present what they believe and teach what they believe and then not be able to address it till 2 weeks later. Honestly, I don't know. Perhaps there are other reasons. Either way, what I'm telling you is we're going to address that subject when the time is right, and I have the release in my heart and spirit to do so. Instead, I opened this morning with the thoughts that flooded my mind a few days ago as I was riding around in my truck minding my own business. And that is the thoughts about people trickling in only to find us arguing among ourselves. With those thoughts, over the last few days, I've been reflecting upon our journey into this. As we made our journey, our way as an assembly out of the Word of Faith Connections, because that's where most of us came from, we made our way out of the Word of Faith Connections. I didn't even know there was such a thing as Torah observers. All I knew is that the more I read my Bible, the more I realized that I had been lied to and I had been deceived. And part of that, if we are all honest about it, part of that deception was from self-deception and lies that we chose to believe. But realizing that I had been lied to and deceived about so many things, I began to repent, to turn from those things. That meant turning away from Sunday worship to remembering the Sabbath. That meant rejecting the lie from hell that it is now okay to eat pigs. That meant turning from Christmas, Easter, and Halloween to the Feast of YAHWEH listed in Leviticus 23. That meant turning from the doctrine of demons that says the law was nailed to the cross and we don't have to keep it anymore. Now, I knew and understood that this was separating me from those I had been associated with, but so be it. Right. All I ever said to any of them was, take your Bible and show me where I'm wrong. I don't want to be wrong. And when they could not do that, I was okay with the fact that the path I was choosing to take was separating me from them. Understand, I wasn't seeking to separate from anybody. I was seeking to separate myself from idolatry, from paganism, from false doctrine, from disobedience to what is written. But when you do that, you inevitably find yourself separated from people who are clinging to those doctrines and the traditions of men and making void the word of YAHWEH. Inevitably, you find yourself separated from them. But my resolve was, if nobody else goes, I have to go this way. And that's the resolve all of us have to have. Thankfully, I didn't have to go alone. My family searched the scriptures like a Berean and chose to walk toward obedience in Torah. Many of you, some of you, searched the scriptures like Bereans and chose to walk toward obedience in Torah. Been with this assembly for years and years and years. Making those choices isolated us and secluded us for a season, and we talked about that last week. Or no, we didn't. I talked about that Wednesday on my way back from Arkansas on a short video. We were isolated for a season, and honestly, we did not know that there was anyone else out there walking the same path that we were walking. Had no clue. It was years later before I became aware of people like Zachary Bauer and New to Torah, or Rob Skiba and all the things that he was doing. And it's actually only recently, within the last year or so, year and a half or so, that I became aware of men like Matthew Jensen, ministers of the New Covenant, and Sean Griffin, Kingdom in Context, and Mike Heidelberg, Hanging on His Words, and Josh with Founded Earth Brothers. Only recently did I become aware of them, and I am thankful that Yahweh's calling people out of Babylon and that He's raising up teachers and leaders to assist us on our journey. I'm thankful to discover that there are so many who are responding to the same Ruach HaKodesh that we responded to, and they're coming out of where they are, and they are in full pursuit of truth. But what I find troubling is how much distrust there is among us and how many dissensions continue to rise up. Distrust. I find in the Torah observers that there are so many who no longer want to trust preachers and teachers anymore, because they came out of churches where they got lied to. But we need to keep this in mind. The Bible doesn't say that in the last days preachers are going to find people with itching ears and heap them to themselves. It says that people with itching ears will heap to themselves preachers. In other words, the fact that we were lied to is not all the preacher's fault. We need to be honest. We, the people, went in search of churches with preachers who would tell us the lies that we were the most comfortable hearing. That went over good. That's a fact. We weren't spiritual enough to go in search of truth. We can lie to ourselves now if we want to, but we weren't spiritual enough to go in search of truth. We had been raised on lies that we believed to be truth. And so when we became adults, we went in search of preachers who would tell us the lies that we were the most comfortable hearing. We formed churches and heaped to ourselves preachers, hired for ourselves preachers who would preach what we wanted to hear. And now that we have repented and turned to Yahweh, we cannot act like it was all the preacher's fault. He was telling us what we wanted to hear. And had He not told us what we wanted to hear, we'd have fired Him and hired somebody else who would tell us what we wanted to hear. And if we couldn't have done that, we'd have just left the church, went somewhere else where they had a preacher preaching what we wanted to hear, and we'd have said, well, God led me here. So the point is, it's not fair to bring a bias into the Torah pursuit where we are now against preachers and teachers. If we have a bias at all, it should be against trusting our own hearts. Yet I find people are more biased against preachers and teachers than they are against their own heart. I find it troubling how much distrust there is among us. We distrust preachers, we distrust teachers, we distrust serving, we distrust helping, we distrust giving, we distrust tithing because we saw so many abuses of those things in our former gathering places. But there's not only distrust, there are dissensions. And we seem to move from one dissension to another. I didn't come out of what I came out of to find a place to argue. I came out because the Father was saying to me, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways, so you need to repent. Right. I came out that I might know His thoughts and that I might walk in His ways. And so much of the distrust and dissension I see is counterproductive to us ever discovering Yahweh's thoughts and His ways. I'm not saying that we shouldn't seek to know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Hear me now. I'm not saying that we should not contend for the faith. Y'all know that we must. Well, what I'm saying is that because so many people came into this walk out of the lies of mainstream denominations instead of out of a non-religious, straight-up, heathenistic background, many of them are now too skeptical and too zealous to allow for just good fellowship and growth. And this, hear me now, this skepticism and uncontrolled zeal is causing too many factions where there are not enough facts. I want to say that again. This skepticism and uncontrolled zeal is causing too many factions where there aren't enough facts for us to be dividing over. I started looking yesterday, and I was shocked to see how many times the Scriptures warn us about this very thing. The Scriptures warn multiple times those of us who are going into assemblies to not give into uncontrolled zeal and undisciplined curiosity, which are fueled by skepticism. Because if we do, we're going to have dissensions, divisions, and heated disagreements. So let's look at some of those warnings, and our text is a good place to start. Titus 3:9. Everybody who's plagued with uncontrolled zeal and undisciplined curiosity denies emphatically that their particular question is a foolish one. It says, avoid foolish questions. Well, mine is a very important question. It's not foolish. But when you start with that attitude, you're missing the point. Listen to the point. The point is avoid. Be a bystander, stand aloof of, stand away from, is what that word means. But there's something in most of us that makes us want to wade in and give our 2 cents worth on every question that arises, whether it's a foolish one or not. But the admonition from the Ruach through Paul here is to avoid as many of those as you can. We cannot avoid them all, but avoid as many as you can. Here's what we're to avoid. 1, foolish questions. The word questions there means searchings. Avoid foolish searchings. Avoid absurd searchings. Some people are always searching some obscure, absurd thing. Always. Avoid as much of that as you can. And then avoid genealogies. I have my suspicions about this word because I'm not convinced that there were or that there are many people who are discussing how their family's genealogy is superior to somebody else's family's genealogy. But perhaps what Paul's warning us here about, perhaps there are people arguing over a particular doctrine that they hold can be traced back to certain generations. In other words, they're saying things like, I know that my view is correct because I can prove to you historically that 7 generations ago there was this group of people who did it the way that I'm saying we're supposed to do it. Philo said so, Josephus said so, and so we trace it back generations. What it's saying here is avoid those discussions if you can. And then it says avoid contentions. Contentions are arguments. It doesn't say they are okay if it's an important subject. I wish it did. It just says avoid arguments or contentions. Sometimes it seems like those who have been in the Torah observant community for any time at all are eagerly looking for arguments to participate in, to show how spiritual they are now. They scroll through Facebook posts and YouTube videos and sit in services hoping to find something they can disagree about and argue with anyone who will argue with them about it. It seems like that. So the admonition is, if an argument can be avoided, just avoid it. We're never going to know the power and the pleasure of walking in Torah until we learn to avoid arguing about Torah. Deuteronomy 28 lists a plethora of amazing benefits of obedience. I mean, there's a long list where Yahweh says, if you'll hearken unto me and obey my voice, I'm going to do this, 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 and this for you. But we'll never know the beautiful benefits of keeping Torah if we're always arguing about something in Torah. If you want to know how serious a matter this is, do a word search on the Greek word translated as contentions. It's the Greek word eris, E-R-I-S. Just take your Strong's and Concordance and do a search of that word. Let me give you just a short list here. When it comes to contentions, Romans 1:29 says that those who Yahweh has turned over to reprobate minds are filled with eris. There it gets translated as debates. So listen to him. Those that Yahweh turns over to reprobate minds become filled with debating. Reprobate means worthless and unapproved minds. Worthless, unapproved minds just get consumed with wanting to debate. Romans 1:29. Romans 12:12 and Romans 12:12 and 13 list eris, and there it gets translated as strife, but it lists that as a work of darkness. Contentions or strife or debating is a work of darkness. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 3, it's listed as a sign that someone's walking after their carnal or their fleshly mind. It's not a gift of the Spirit by a long shot. It is a work of a carnal fleshly mind. There in 1 Corinthians 3:3, eris gets translated as strife. So consider seriously what we've already been told here. Arguing, debating, contentions are associated with reprobate minds, carnal minds, and works of darkness. That's serious. 2 Corinthians 12:20, Paul pleaded with the assembly at Corinth that when he arrived, he didn't find them entangled in a bunch of debates. Eris. But isn't that a sign of how spiritual we are? The more things we can debate. Paul said, I pray that when I get there, I don't find you engaged in a bunch of debating. Galatians 5 tells us that the works of the flesh are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like. Of the which I tell you before, as I've told you in times past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of Yahweh. What a list that is. The works of the flesh are idolatry, witchcraft, lasciviousness, and eris. There it got translated as the word variance. I have no idea why. But it's listed right there with witchcraft and lasciviousness and idolatry. So much of what we see is not Ruach HaKodesh inspired searching of Torah. Instead, what we see is the flesh, the carnal mind, and darkness striving against other carnal minds, causing strife and contention in the midst of our assemblies. So let's read the next verse about eris together. I want you to turn there. 1 Timothy chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 4. Talking about somebody that contradicts the words of Yeshua actually, but it says this: he is proud, knowing nothing, but doting about questions and strifes of words, whereof comes envy, strife, railings, and evil surmisings. What does the word proud mean? Puffed up, exactly. An overinflated opinion of oneself. And yet, how much does he know? Absolutely nothing. If he's got an overinflated opinion of himself, whatever knowledge he used to have got blown out with the inflation of his ego. The word doting there means to be sick. So, doting about questions means he has a diseased appetite for something. They have a diseased appetite for searching. Always wanting to search out some new thing so they can be right about it. That's the whole purpose. I just want to be right about it. And listen to this, strifes of words. Strifes of words. That means to be nitpicky about every little thing, no matter how trifle, they have to be right about it. Now listen to that entire sentence now. What it's saying what Paul said to Timothy is, when a person is filled with pride, but in reality knows nothing, and when they have diseased appetite for searching stuff out, and they have to argue over every minute point about it, from that characterization, from that comes envy, strife, railings, and evil surmising. There's nothing good in that list. They're not going to accomplish anything good. Envy means ill will. In other words, a person like this, it's more important to them to prove themselves right than to protect a relationship. They will destroy a relationship just for the purpose of proving they're right. Strife, eris, contentions and arguments, railings. This word means to vilify. Come on now, y'all ought to be seeing what Paul's warning us about. This means to vilify. It means to be so zealous that anybody who doesn't agree with you gets vilified. They're just pagan. They hadn't come out of Babylon yet. Somebody disagreed with something I said a couple of weeks ago on YouTube. And here's the shot they took. I knew that Baptist preacher was still buried in there somewhere.
Oh, gracious.
That's called vilifying, okay? They're demon possessed. What this word railings means is to stoop to the point of attacking the person instead of simply discussing the doctrine. Evil surmising. That means that you give way to harmful suspicions. You begin to doubt and attack their character, their love of Yahweh, their love of truth. You just have these suspicions. They're not everything they say they are. All of those things are grouped in with and surround this one word, eris, which means to argue, to debate, or to have contentions with. So back to Titus 3. Avoid foolish questions, avoid genealogies, avoid contentions, and next it says in Titus 3, avoid strivings. Strivings here means battles and controversies, but look at what the battles are about. Strivings about the law. The Greek word here is not nomos. Nomos means law or Torah. The Greek word here is nomikos. N-O-M-I-K-O-S. Nomikos. Every other place you find the word nomikos in the New Testament, it is translated as lawyer. Not an Alexander Shannara kind of lawyer. Call me Alabama. That's not the lawyer we're talking about. But a lawyer in the sense of someone who is supposed to be an expert in Torah. They were called lawyers. Nomikos. It seems to me that the warning here is clear. Everybody wants to be the expert with the insight and inside knowledge of controversial subjects contained in Torah. And why does everybody want to be the expert? So they can live better, so that they can have more joy, so that they can serve Yahweh better? No. Everybody seems to want to be an expert with the inside knowledge of controversial subjects contained in Torah so they can win arguments and appear spiritual. So they can get more clicks, more views, more subscriptions, more likes, more Patreons who will support their page. The more controversial the subject, the more views you will get on YouTube. So therefore, those who create the videos and those who watch the videos are coming from the same motivation. Teachers and viewers alike all search out these controversial subjects so that they can be the lawyer, the expert on the subject who everyone comes to in order to gather up this amazing insight and knowledge that this lawyer has. And, pardon me, we're being warned here, don't be that guy. Those guys strain at gnats and swallow camels. Those guys forget the weightier matters of Torah. Paul told Titus, there in chapter 3, verse 9, he said, such things are useless and unprofitable. They have no real use and they bring no real benefit. And you know, Paul would know. He would know the futility of being such a man. Because he was such a man. His uncontrolled zeal and undisciplined curiosity had him fighting against the very works of Yahweh to the point of putting people to death. And so it does to everybody else. Everybody else who has uncontrolled zeal and undisciplined curiosity will also find themselves fighting against the very works of Yahweh. Now let's read the next two verses in Titus 3. A man, verse 10, a man that is a heretic, after the first and second admonition, reject. What do you think of when you hear the word heretic? Don't be bashful. Come on. What is a heretic?
Pagan.
All right, there you go. Very good. Usually, when we call somebody a heretic, we simply mean they disagree with me. Or they do things different than I do. And if they disagree with me or do things different than I do, they've got to be a pagan or a heretic. But this word actually means to be schismatic. Look it up. One who is schismatic. To be schismatic means that you are in favor of schisms. A schism is a reference to two groups that strongly oppose one another. So go back and look at what Paul said. Pay attention to the instruction here. It's not saying if there's someone among you who believes heresies, reject them. That's not what it said. It says if there is someone in your assembly who favors, who likes, who loves, who thrives on creating schisms, who loves to argue about things over and over, ask them once, ask them twice to stop. If they don't stop, reject them. And sometimes that means ejecting them. Because there are people who thrive on schisms. And Paul's instruction is if there's somebody in your midst like that, it's dangerous and harmful to the assembly, to the fellowship. Reject them. Listen to verse 11 and tell us why. Knowing that he that is such, that is, he that loves to create schisms, he that is such is subverted and sins, being condemned of himself. Boy, it's like Paul was visiting an assembly in 2024 and trying to help us. The word of Yahweh is alive and powerful. Look at that word subverted. Anybody that loves creating schisms is subverted. That word means to be twisted and to be turned inside out. So Paul's saying, when you find somebody who loves to create schisms, something on the inside of that person is not right. It is a perversion to be a person who would rather argue all the time instead of finding common ground and joining hands, valuing fellowship, and serving together in the kingdom. I agree that there are some non-negotiables. But there are some people who just like to stir up and create schisms over things for the sake of causing the schism. Something on the inside of those people is not right. The word translated sinneth there is not the word that we're used to, which means to transgress Torah. This Greek word means to miss the mark. We've all heard that. It means to miss the mark. So somebody who loves to create schisms is missing the mark. And listen to the irony of it. They're running around all up in people's faces, all up in other people's posts, all up in other people's videos, all up on their keyboards, trying to condemn everybody else for what they believe, when all the time it says here they're actually condemning themselves. If all you want to do is debate and argue, there is something not right in you, and you prove it by arguing and debating every minor thing. You're condemning yourself. Zachary Bauer had a channel, I mentioned him earlier, a channel, and it was called New to Torah. And when he came here several years ago and spoke to us, he made this comment. He said, "We are all new to Torah." How right he is. So I think it would benefit us greatly if we went back in our assemblies to Acts 15, to an Acts 15 approach to our journey. If you got your Bible, turn there. Since we're all new to Torah, taking the advice from James in Acts 15 would benefit us greatly. Acts 15:19, James said, "Wherefore my sentence is that we trouble not them which from among the Gentiles are turned to Yahweh." The word translated trouble there, the prefix of that word is para, which means to come alongside of. And the suffix is enokleo, and it means to crowd into for the purpose of annoying. So to come alongside of and get in their face to annoy them. So trouble's not really strong enough a word to be used here to translate the Greek word. Perhaps we would get the meaning of James's instruction if we read it this way. Wherefore my sentence is, we stop harassing those who have turned to Yahweh from among the Gentiles. Stop harassing them.
Yes.
They're new to Torah. They are unfamiliar with Torah. And when they turn to Yahweh, and when they begin to come into the synagogues, they're being harassed by those who grew up learning Torah. So James said, stop that. Give them room to grow. Verse 20. But that we write unto them that they abstain from pollution of idols and from fornication and from things strangled and from blood. So James said, if they desire to be in our synagogues and fellowship with us, there are some non-negotiables that they need to agree to immediately if they want to come in. I summarize them in two statements. James was saying they have to stop participating in activities associated with pagan gods. Number two, they have to agree to a Torah-approved diet. They can't come in and fellowship with us if they don't stop participating in activities associated with pagan gods and until they agree to a Torah-approved diet. Pollution of idols, it says there. Pollution means a ceremonial defilement. So participating in any ceremony connected with the worship of a pagan god is not allowed. Fornication, this word could certainly refer to an unacceptable sexual behavior, but that's less likely than it being a continuation of the first state, and that is, of the first statement. That is, to participate in ceremonies associated with pagan gods, though that participation may seem harmless to us, Yahweh says that's fornication against me when you participate in that. Things strangled and from blood. Those are both associated with what we can eat and what we cannot eat and how it gets prepared. So James says these are non-negotiable if people wish to assemble with us. They have to stop participating in activities associated with pagan gods. They have to agree to a Torah-approved diet. Was he saying that the rest doesn't matter? Absolutely not. What he was saying is give them room to grow without being harassed every time they come through the door. Verse 21, for Moses of old time has in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. So James is expecting them, us, to learn the rest of Torah, to keep the rest of Torah, and to do the rest of Torah. Learn, keep, do, but he gives us time to do it. Week after week, Sabbath after Sabbath, we assemble together for the purpose of learning Torah. But he said, give them room to grow free of harassment. So, let's create an environment that is 100% dedicated to Torah. But at the same time, let's create an environment that is welcoming and nurturing to those who come in from among the Gentiles and turn to Yahweh. Let them not come in and be harassed by us. You know, people joke and say that when you move to Alabama from another state, when you move here, you immediately have to declare your allegiance. Are you an Alabama fan or an Auburn fan? Well, I never heard of either. It doesn't matter. You moved to Alabama, you got to choose a side. You for Alabama, you for Auburn. Well, we shouldn't be that fanatical about people who are coming into our assemblies. Hey, how do you pronounce the Father's name? How do you pronounce the Messiah's name? Which calendar do you think is correct? How do you count to Shavuot? You got to choose a side now. Hurry. That's harassment. Let's make sure if they've turned to Yahweh that they've forsaken ceremonies connected to other gods and that they understand the dietary laws, and then let's give them room to grow with harassment. In conclusion, I'm going to deal with the lunar Sabbath doctrine. Not because I want to. And certainly not because I want to argue about any part of Torah with anybody else. It actually grieves me that I have to do it. But I have to. Therefore, I'm going to tell you what they believe as thoroughly and as honestly as I possibly can. Then I'm going to tell you what I believe about the Sabbath and what I believe about what they say they believe. Then I'm going to move on from it. I am not going to debate it. I'm not going to make accusations against those who believe it. I'm not going to rail against them. I'm not going to call them pagan. I'm not going to call them heretics. I'm not going to accuse them of any of those things. I am simply going to tell you what I see in the Bible. And then you have to decide for yourself what you see. And having studied it, I realize that is going to lead to us having to deal with calendar issues. And we will do that as well, but I will deal with it in its proper time, and that will be when we get to the subject in the book of Enoch. So, The message this morning is, let's relax. Yahweh never chides us for not knowing or not understanding a thing. Never. If He shows us truth, if He gives light on a matter, and we reject what He shows us, that's a different matter. He will get you for that. But He will not condemn us for what we don't yet know. Yahweh gives us room to grow. That's the reason He spoke through James and said, give them room to grow. He is the most merciful and the most long-suffering. In Ephesians 4, Paul exhorts the assembly at Ephesus to give no place to the devil. And if you want to turn there, that'll be our closing. Ephesians 4, Paul exhorts the assembly at Ephesus with these words. Give no place to the devil. It's interesting the word that he used to speak of our adversary. He used the word diablo or diablos. Diablo means somebody that accuses and slanders. So he says, give no place to the one who accuses and slanders. Then Paul said this to the assembly at Ephesus, and it's sound advice for us beginning in verse 29. Let no corrupt, and that word means rotten and worthless, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that is, use words like an architect would to build up somebody else, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. Grieve not the Holy Spirit of Yahweh, whereby we are sealed unto the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. Those adjectives accurately describe a high percentage of exchanges that you hear and see on social media concerning Torah subjects. Bitterness, a sharp, piercing, poisonous personality. Wrath. Wrath is undisciplined passion. Your passion about a subject makes you unrelenting in your attempt to convince everybody else to see it the way you do. Anger. This word speaks of an excitement of mind that causes you to have indignation towards others who don't see what you see. It is unbridled passion. Clamor. If you got a Strong's dictionary, go look this word up. Strong says it means to shriek like a raven. Any of you ever been around crows? Bob's smiling. Caw, 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 caw. Repeating the same old stuff tirelessly and relentlessly because nobody will listen. It makes it difficult to get around them because every time you get around them, you know they're going to caw, caw, caw. Paul said, don't do that. It's hard to fellowship with someone who has a pet doctrine that they are overly passionate about, and no matter what, in every conversation, no matter what the conversation is, they start their caw spiel. It's hard to fellowship with them. You might just want to relax and eat a hamburger, but you can't because of the caw. Evil speaking. We're familiar with this Greek word, blasphemia. And blasphemia means to seek to injure another person with your words, to rail against them personally, to vilify them as being evil or bad just because they don't see what you see. Malice. I think the Good News Bible comes close here when they translate it this way. No more hateful feelings of any kind or any sort. In other words, stop being hard to get along with. Here's his concluding statement, and I conclude with it as well. Be kind to one another. Tender-hearted. Forgiving one another. Even as Yahweh, for Yeshua's sake, has forgiven you. Here's a quick breakdown of those words in one sentence. Be useful to one another. Have compassion and sympathy for one another. And with great kindness, pardon and rescue one another. Now those are words to live by. James told us to rejoice at the trying of our faith, trying of what we believe. And I actually do, and am rejoicing at the opportunity to try our faith. Because in the process of doing that, Yeshua showed me things in the book of James and in the book of Titus and in the book of Ephesians I had never seen before that are so relevant to us today. Let's be kind and tender-hearted and forgive and learn to fellowship. Amen. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. As His name is put upon you, so shall He Himself bless you.